The night was alive with energy, and the streets of London buzzed like a hive of activity. Alex, a spirited traveler from another continent, had spent the last week exploring every corner of this historic city. From the towering spires of Big Ben to the winding alleys of Covent Garden, he soaked in everything London had to offer. But tonight felt different. It wasn't just about sightseeing anymore. It was about celebration. His trip was coming to an end, and Alex wanted to make his final night unforgettable. He started at a cozy pub tucked away in a quiet street near Buckingham Palace. The warm glow of lanterns filled onto the cobblestones outside, inviting him in. Inside, laughter filled the air as locals and tourists mingled over pints of ale and plates of hearty food. Alex joined a group of fellow travelers at a wooden table cluttered with empty glasses. They exchanged stories of their adventures, each one trying to outdo the other with tales of daring escapades or quirky mishaps. Alex listened intently, nodding along, but soon found himself chiming in with exaggerated accounts of his own exploits. As the hours ticked by, the drinks kept flowing. One pint turned into two, then three, and before long, Alex's words began to slur ever so slightly. His friends noticed but brushed it off, assuming he'd simply had too much fun. Encouraged by the lively atmosphere, Alex decided it wasn't time to call it a night yet. "Let's hit another spot," he declared, raising his glass high. Cheers erupted around the table, and the group spilled back onto the streets, ready for more. Their next destination was a bustling bar closer to the heart of the city. Here, music thumped through speakers, and neon lights painted the walls in vibrant hues. Alex danced, laughed, and clinked glasses with strangers who quickly became new friends. But somewhere between the flashing lights and the rhythm of the music, something shifted. The world seemed to tilt just a little, and Alex's balance wavered. Still, he shrugged it off, convinced that adrenaline, and maybe one more drink, would keep him going. By the time the group finally called it quits, Alex was feeling far from steady. He bid farewell to his companions, promising to stay in touch, and set off on his own. The cool night air hit him like a wave, sobering him up just enough to realize he was alone. With no clear plan, he wandered aimlessly, guided only by the dim glow of streetlights. That's when he saw it, the grand gates of Buckingham Palace, standing tall against the dark sky. Something about the sight pulled him in. Maybe it was curiosity, or perhaps the lingering effects of the alcohol clouding his judgment. Whatever it was, Alex couldn't resist getting closer. As he approached, the stillness of the palace grounds struck him. There were no crowds, no noise, just the quiet dignity of tradition. And then he saw them. The royal guards, mounted on their magnificent horses, standing perfectly still as if carved from stone. Alex stared in awe for a moment, marveling at the scene, but admiration quickly gave way to mischief. A reckless idea sparked in his mind, an impulse he couldn't suppress. Little did he know, this fleeting decision would change everything. The grandeur of Buckingham Palace loomed before Alex, its regal presence almost surreal under the dim glow of the streetlights. The royal guards, dressed in their iconic red tunics and tall bearskin hats, stood motionless beside their horses, exuding an aura of discipline and tradition. To most people, this sight would evoke respect and admiration. But for Alex, whose mind was clouded by intoxication, it sparked a strange mix of fascination and recklessness. As he stumbled closer, his footsteps uneven on the pavement, Alex's focus shifted to one particular horse. It was a magnificent creature, its coat gleaming even in the low light. The animal seemed calm, its ears twitching slightly as if tuned to every sound around it. Mounted atop the horse sat a guard, his posture rigid and unyielding, his face expressionless behind the shadow of his hat. For a moment, Alex simply stared, entranced by the sheer size and beauty of the beast. But then something inside him, a combination of bravado and impaired judgment, took over. "Hey there, big guy," Alex slurred, pointing at the horse with exaggerated enthusiasm. His voice broke the silence like a sharp note in an otherwise serene melody. A few bystanders turned to look, their expressions ranging from curiosity to mild annoyance. One elderly woman shook her head disapprovingly, while a young couple exchanged worried glances, but Alex didn't notice, or perhaps he didn't care. He took another step forward, ignoring the small sign nearby that clearly stated, "Do not touch or disturb the horses." In his drunken state, rules felt irrelevant, almost invisible. All he could think about was how amusing it might be to interact with the majestic animal. "You're huge," he exclaimed, laughing loudly as though sharing a private joke with the horse. The guard sitting atop the horse remained silent, his gaze fixed straight ahead, betraying no emotion. But Alex wasn't done. Emboldened by his own laughter and the lack of immediate reaction from the guard, he leaned in closer. Without warning, he raised his foot and gave the horse a clumsy kick to its flank. The impact was neither forceful nor malicious, but it was enough to startle the animal. The horse let out a sudden snort, its body tensing as it reared up on its hind legs. Its front hooves flailed in the air, narrowly missing the guard, who struggled to maintain control. Panic rippled through the crowd. People gasped, some stepping back instinctively, while others shouted warnings. Parents pulled their children away from the scene, shielding them from what could have been a dangerous situation. The commotion grew louder as more onlookers gathered, drawn by the unexpected chaos. A nearby tourist fumbled with her phone, trying to capture the moment on camera, unsure whether she should intervene. For Alex, reality began to blur further. He froze, his grin fading as the gravity of what he'd done started to sink in. The horse, now calmer but still visibly agitated, pawed at the ground, its breaths heavy and audible. The guard, having regained full control, locked eyes with Alex, his expression unreadable behind the stoic facade. For the first time that night, Alex felt a flicker of unease. His bravado wavered, replaced by a creeping sense of dread. Security personnel stationed nearby sprang into action, rushing toward the scene. Within moments, Alex found himself surrounded, their stern faces leaving no room for doubt about the seriousness of the situation. As they approached, Alex raised his hands defensively, stammering apologies that were drowned out by the growing murmur of the crowd. What had started as a careless act of drunken mischief was quickly spiraling into something far more consequential. And everyone present knew it. The scene outside Buckingham Palace was nothing short of chaotic. The horse, though now steadied by its rider, still shifted uneasily, its ears flicking back and forth, as if sensing the tension in the air. Alex stood frozen, his hands raised halfway in a gesture that seemed equal parts surrender and confusion. His earlier bravado had vanished, replaced by wide-eyed panic as he realized the magnitude of what he'd done. The crowd around him buzzed with murmurs, some people shaking their heads in disbelief, while others snapped photos or recorded videos on their phones. Security officers moved quickly, their authoritative presence cutting through the noise like a blade. Two of them stepped forward, their expressions stern and unyielding. "Sir, you need to come with us," one of them said firmly, his voice carrying an unmistakable tone of command. Alex opened his mouth to protest, but found no words. Instead, he stammered something incoherent, his face flushing red, not just from embarrassment, but also from the remnants of alcohol still coursing through his system. "Do you understand what you've done?" another officer asked, his tone sharp enough to pierce through Alex's foggy mind. For a moment, Alex hesitated, glancing at the horse, and then at the guard, who still sat rigidly atop the animal. The guard's face remained impassive, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of restrained anger, that made Alex's stomach churn. He nodded slowly, swallowing hard as reality began to crash down on him like a wave. Without further discussion, the officers escorted Alex away from the scene, gripping his arms firmly to ensure he didn't resist. A few bystanders clapped approvingly, muttering comments about how such behavior deserved consequences. Others simply watched in stunned silence, unable to look away from the unfolding drama. As Alex was led past the growing crowd, he could feel their stares burning into him, some filled with disdain, others with pity, and a few with outright disgust. Once inside the security office near the palace gates, Alex was made to sit on a cold metal chair while the officers questioned him. His head throbbed, not just from the drinks, but from the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Name. One officer barked, pen poised over a clipboard. Alex mumbled his response, his voice barely above a whisper. And your nationality. The officer continued, jotting down notes without looking up. Each question felt like a hammer striking a nail deeper into Alex's guilt-ridden conscience. It wasn't long before news of the incident reached higher authorities. The royal guards were symbols of tradition and discipline, and any act perceived as disrespectful toward them carried significant weight. Within minutes, senior officials arrived, their uniforms crisp and their demeanor even stricter than the initial responders. They reviewed the details of the incident, speaking in hushed tones that only added to the tension in the room. Alex sat slumped in his chair, avoiding eye contact, his mind racing with thoughts of what might happen next. As the gravity of the situation sank in, Alex finally managed to string together a coherent sentence. "I'm sorry," he blurted out, his voice trembling. "I didn't mean. I wasn't thinking." His apology trailed off, sounding hollow even to his own ears. One of the senior officials fixed him with a piercing glare. "That much is obvious," the man replied curtly. "But apologies won't undo what you've done." Outside, the story spread like wildfire. Social media lit up with posts about the drunk tourist who had dared to disturb a royal guard's horse. Photos and videos of the incident circulated rapidly, accompanied by captions ranging from outrage to mockery. News outlets picked up the story within hours, turning what had started as a reckless act into a national talking point. By dawn, Alex's name and face would be known across the country, leaving him with little chance of escaping the spotlight. Back in the security office, Alex buried his face in his hands, overwhelmed by shame and regret. He hadn't intended for any of this to happen. It had all been a stupid, drunken impulse. But intentions didn't matter now. What mattered was the damage he had caused, and the punishment that would surely follow. When Alex finally woke up, the world around him was cold and unfamiliar. Gone were the lively streets of London, the cheerful chatter of tourists, and the comforting hum of pubs. Instead, he found himself in a small, sterile holding cell with gray walls that seemed to close in on him. His head throbbed painfully, partly from the remnants of last night's drinking spree, and partly from the stress of everything that had happened. For a moment, he wondered if it had all been a bad dream, until he remembered the horse, the guard, and the angry crowd. A few hours later, Alex was brought into an interrogation room where two officers awaited him. One of them slid a file across the table, its contents neatly organized, but intimidating nonetheless. "You're in serious trouble," the officer said bluntly, his voice devoid of sympathy. "Kicking a royal guard's horse isn't just some minor offense. It's considered an act of disrespect toward British heritage." Alex blinked, trying to process what he was hearing. Heritage. He hadn't thought about it like that. To him, it had been nothing more than a silly, drunken mistake, a fleeting moment of poor judgment. But now, sitting here under harsh fluorescent lights, he realized how wrong he'd been. The officers explained the charges: public disorder, assault on an animal, and endangerment of both the guard and bystanders. Each accusation hit Alex like a punch to the gut. Assault, endangerment. Those words sounded so severe, so far removed from the lighthearted mood he'd been in just hours earlier. The officers also informed him that because the incident involved a royal guard, it fell under special laws designed to protect the dignity and safety of ceremonial duties. This wasn't just any crime. It was a direct affront to centuries-old traditions. As the gravity of his situation sank in, Alex began to feel a mix of emotions: fear, shame, and disbelief. Fear because he had no idea what kind of punishment awaited him. Shame because he knew he deserved every bit of criticism coming his way. And disbelief because none of this seemed real. How could one reckless kick lead to such dire consequences? His mind raced as he tried to piece together how things had spiraled so out of control. Later that day, representatives from his embassy arrived to assist him. They listened patiently as Alex recounted the events of the previous night, their expressions growing increasingly grave. While they assured him they would do everything possible to help, they also warned him not to expect leniency. "This is a big deal here," one of them said gently but firmly. "People take these traditions very seriously. You're going to have to face the music." Word of Alex's arrest spread quickly, making headlines not only in local newspapers but internationally as well. Back home, his family scrambled to understand what had gone wrong. Calls poured in from relatives and friends, all asking the same question. How could this happen? His parents, devastated by the news, hired a lawyer who specialized in international law, hoping to mitigate the damage. Meanwhile, social media continued to buzz with reactions, many people expressing outrage over Alex's actions, while others debated whether his intoxication should be considered a mitigating factor. By the time Alex appeared before a magistrate for his initial hearing, cameras lined the courthouse steps, capturing every moment for the world to see. Dressed in rumpled clothes and looking pale and disheveled, Alex shuffled into the courtroom, his head bowed low. The judge listened carefully as the prosecution outlined the case against him, emphasizing the symbolic importance of the royal guards and the potential risks posed by Alex's behavior. When it was Alex's turn to speak, he struggled to find the right words. "I'm sorry," he managed to say, his voice cracking. "I never meant to hurt anyone or disrespect anything. I wasn't thinking clearly." Though the judge acknowledged Alex's remorse, she made it clear that apologies alone wouldn't suffice. The court set a date for a full trial, leaving Alex in limbo as he awaited his fate. As he was led back to his cell, Alex couldn't help but reflect on how drastically his life had changed in less than 24 hours. What had started as a carefree vacation had turned into a nightmare, one that would leave lasting scars, both personally and legally. The days following Alex's arrest felt like an eternity. News of his reckless act spread far and wide, igniting a firestorm of public debate. Social media platforms were flooded with posts about the drunk tourist who had dared to kick a royal guard's horse. Some users shared memes mocking Alex, while others wrote long threads dissecting the cultural insensitivity of his actions. Hashtags like #RespectTraditions and #ShameMeOnHim trended for days, drawing attention not just from locals but from people around the globe. The incident became more than just a story. It was a symbol of what many saw as a lack of respect for British heritage. Petitions calling for harsh punishment began circulating online, gathering thousands of signatures within hours. One particularly popular petition demanded that Alex be banned from ever visiting the UK again, arguing that leniency would send the wrong message. Talk shows and radio programs debated the issue endlessly, with hosts inviting historians, legal experts, and even former royal guards to weigh in. Some argued that Alex's behavior warranted severe consequences to uphold the sanctity of royal traditions, while others questioned whether his intoxication should be considered a mitigating factor. The controversy only grew louder, dividing opinions and keeping the story firmly in the spotlight. Amidst this whirlwind of outrage, Alex's family issued a public apology in hopes of calming the storm. In a heartfelt statement released through their lawyer, they expressed deep regret for what had happened and pleaded for understanding. "Our son made a terrible mistake." The statement read, "He is truly sorry for his actions and understands the gravity of what he has done. We ask for compassion as he works to make amends." Despite their sincerity, the apology did little to quell the anger of those who felt Alex's actions were unforgivable. For Alex, being at the center of such intense scrutiny was overwhelming. Back in his holding cell, he spent hours replaying the events in his mind, trying to figure out how everything had gone so horribly wrong. He thought about the horse, the guard, and the shocked faces of the bystanders. Every detail felt heavier now, magnified by the knowledge that millions of people were judging him for those few seconds of poor judgment. Sleep eluded him, and when it came, it was plagued by nightmares of angry crowds shouting accusations. As the trial date approached, Alex's lawyer worked tirelessly to prepare a defense. They gathered character references from friends and colleagues back home, painting a picture of Alex as a generally well-meaning individual who had simply made a catastrophic error. They also highlighted his lack of prior criminal record, emphasizing that this was an isolated incident rather than part of a pattern of reckless behavior. Still, the prosecution remained firm, presenting evidence that underscored the seriousness of the offense and its potential impact on public safety. Public opinion remained sharply divided. Some believed Alex deserved a second chance, pointing out that everyone makes mistakes, especially when under the influence. Others, however, saw his actions as emblematic of a broader disregard for cultural norms and insisted that leniency would undermine respect for cherished traditions. Even celebrities and politicians weighed in, further fueling the debate. One prominent historian appeared on a morning show, explaining the historical significance of the Royal Guards and why incidents like this struck a nerve with so many people. These ceremonies aren't just performances, he said. They represent centuries of history and national pride. Despite the chaos surrounding him, Alex tried to focus on one thing: taking responsibility. During meetings with his lawyer, he spoke openly about his remorse and his desire to learn from the experience. He realized now that his actions hadn't just affected him. They had touched countless others, from the guard, whose duty he had disrupted, to the families watching in horror as the horse reared up. For the first time in his life, Alex understood the true weight of accountability. As the world continued to watch and wait for justice to be served, Alex sat alone in his cell, grappling with the enormity of his mistake. He knew that whatever punishment awaited him, it would pale in comparison to the lessons he had already begun to learn. The court's decision would shape his future, but the journey toward redemption would ultimately depend on him. The courtroom was packed on the day of Alex's trial, with reporters, curious onlookers, and even a few tourists eager to witness the outcome of this highly publicized case. Cameras flashed as Alex entered, his head bowed and his hands clasped tightly in front of him. Dressed in a plain shirt and trousers borrowed from the detention center, he looked nothing like the carefree traveler who had wandered London streets just days earlier. His lawyer walked beside him, offering quiet reassurance, but Alex could feel the weight of dozens of eyes boring into him. This was it, the moment that would define not only his legal fate, but also how the world would remember him. As the proceedings began, the prosecution laid out its case with precision. They described Alex's actions as reckless and disrespectful, emphasizing the symbolic importance of the Royal Guards and their horses. These traditions are not merely ceremonial, the prosecutor argued. They represent centuries of history and national pride. To disrupt them is to insult the very fabric of our culture. The judge listened intently, nodding occasionally as evidence was presented, including photos of the startled horse and witness statements from bystanders who had feared for their safety. When it was time for Alex's defense, his lawyer took a different approach. Rather than denying the severity of the incident, she focused on Alex's remorse and lack of intent to cause harm. "My client made a grave mistake," she said, her voice steady and sincere. "But it was born out of poor judgment, not malice. He has expressed deep regret and is committed to making amends." She then submitted letters written by Alex's family, friends, and colleagues, all vouching for his character and attesting to his otherwise responsible nature. Alex himself was given the opportunity to speak. Standing nervously before the judge, he read a prepared statement, his voice trembling but clear. "I cannot undo what I have done, and I will carry the shame of my actions for the rest of my life," he began. "All I can do now is apologize, not just to the court or the guard, but to everyone who values the traditions I disrespected. I promise to learn from this and ensure that something like this never happens again." As he spoke, there were murmurs in the gallery, some sympathetic, others skeptical. After hours of deliberation, the judge returned with a verdict that shocked nearly everyone. Instead of imposing jail time or a hefty fine, she handed down a unique sentence tailored to teach Alex and the public a lesson. First, Alex was ordered to complete 200 hours of community service at a stable that cared for retired police horses. "If you wish to understand the dignity of these animals," the judge said sternly, "then you will dedicate yourself to their care." Second, he was required to attend cultural sensitivity courses designed to educate him about respecting local customs and traditions when traveling abroad. Finally, he received a lifetime ban from visiting any royal sites in the UK, along with a formal letter of apology addressed to the reigning monarch. The courtroom erupted in whispers as people processed the decision. Some applauded the judge's creativity, seeing it as a way to turn punishment into rehabilitation. Others felt the sentence was too lenient, arguing that stricter measures were needed to deter similar incidents in the future. Reporters scrambled to capture reactions from both sides, ensuring the story would dominate headlines once again. For Alex, the ruling brought a mix of relief and resolve. While he knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, he also recognized the opportunity hidden within the punishment. Caring for retired horses might seem daunting, but it offered a chance to connect with the very creatures he had wronged. Attending cultural sensitivity classes would force him to confront his ignorance and grow as a person. And writing the apology letter, that was more than just a formality. It was a step toward genuine reflection and accountability. As he left the courthouse surrounded by reporters shouting questions, Alex kept his focus forward. He didn't have all the answers yet, but one thing was certain. This experience had changed him forever. What started as a careless act of drunken mischief had turned into a pivotal moment, one that would shape the rest of his life. Alex's journey toward redemption began at the stable, a quiet countryside retreat where retired police horses spent their final years in peace. The contrast between this serene setting and the chaos of his arrest couldn't have been starker. On his first day, Alex arrived feeling nervous and out of place. Dressed in worn work boots and overalls provided by the staff, he shuffled into the barn unsure of what to expect. The head caretaker, a no-nonsense woman named Margaret, greeted him with a firm handshake and an even firmer warning. "These animals aren't toys or props. They've served their duty, and now it's our job to honor that service." Margaret wasted no time putting Alex to work. His tasks ranged from mucking out stalls and grooming the horses to feeding them and ensuring they had fresh water. At first, Alex struggled. His movements were clumsy, and he often found himself covered in hay or manure. But as weeks turned into months, something remarkable happened. Slowly but surely, Alex began to form a bond with the horses. He learned their names, personalities, and quirks. There was Bella, a gentle mare who nuzzled him affectionately whenever he brought her apples. Thunder, a proud gelding who demanded respect before accepting any attention. And Daisy, a shy horse who warmed up only after weeks of patient coaxing. Through his daily interactions, Alex gained a newfound appreciation for these majestic creatures. He listened intently as Margaret shared stories about their careers, how they'd patrolled city streets during riots, carried officers through parades, and stood steadfast alongside royal guards. Each tale deepened his understanding of the role these animals played in upholding tradition and order. It wasn't just about physical labor anymore. It was about honoring their legacy and acknowledging the trust placed in them by society. In addition to working at the stable, Alex attended weekly cultural sensitivity classes held in a small community center. The sessions were led by Dr. Patel, a soft-spoken yet insightful professor who specialized in cross-cultural relations. Through lectures, group discussions, and interactive exercises, Alex learned about the importance of respecting local customs when traveling abroad. He discovered how seemingly harmless actions could carry unintended consequences in unfamiliar settings. For instance, touching sacred objects in certain cultures might be seen as deeply offensive, while gestures considered polite in one country could be misinterpreted elsewhere. These lessons opened Alex's eyes to the complexities of global etiquette and left him determined never to repeat his past mistakes. As part of his rehabilitation, Alex also wrote a formal letter of apology addressed to the reigning monarch. Sitting at a wooden desk in his tiny apartment, he labored over every word, wanting to convey not just regret but genuine remorse. "Your Majesty," he began, "I cannot express how deeply sorry I am for my actions. I failed to recognize the significance of your traditions and disrespected the very symbols that unite your nation. Please know that I am committed to learning from this experience and becoming someone worthy of forgiveness." When the letter was finished, he sealed it in an envelope and handed it to his lawyer, knowing it would likely never receive a response, but hoping it might serve as a small gesture of accountability. Word of Alex's efforts began to spread beyond the confines of the stable and classroom. Local newspapers published articles highlighting his progress, portraying him not as a reckless tourist, but as someone striving to make amends. Even some of his harshest critics softened their stance, acknowledging the sincerity of his transformation. Margaret, once skeptical of Alex's intentions, grew visibly warmer toward him. "You're doing good work here," she told him one afternoon as they watched Bella graze peacefully in the paddock. "Don't stop." By the end of his community service, Alex felt like a different person. The cocky traveler who had kicked a royal guard's horse was gone, replaced by someone humbled by experience and eager to contribute positively. Though the scars of his mistake would always remain, they no longer defined him. Instead, they served as reminders of how far he'd come and how much further he still wanted to go. Years passed, and Alex's life took a direction he could never have imagined on that fateful night outside Buckingham Palace. What started as a reckless act had transformed into a journey of growth and self-discovery. Now older, wiser, and infinitely more grounded, Alex found himself standing once again near the iconic gates of the palace, but this time under very different circumstances. He wasn't there as a tourist or an offender. He was there as a speaker invited to share his story with students at a nearby school. The event was part of a program aimed at promoting responsible travel and cultural awareness. When Alex stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. His presence alone commanded attention, not because of fame or charisma, but because everyone in the audience knew his name. They had read about him in newspapers, seen clips of his trial on TV, and followed his redemption arc online. For many young travelers sitting in the auditorium, Alex represented both a cautionary tale and a beacon of hope. "I'm not here to tell you I'm proud of what I did," Alex began, his voice steady yet vulnerable. "In fact, I'll carry the shame of that night for the rest of my life. But I am here to tell you that mistakes, even big ones, don't have to define you. What matters is what you do after." He went on to recount his journey, the humiliation of arrest, the weight of public outrage, the hard work at the stable, and the lessons he'd learned along the way. As he spoke, his words painted a vivid picture of accountability, humility, and resilience. One of the most powerful moments came when Alex described his time caring for the retired horses. "I used to think they were just animals," he admitted, "but now I see them as symbols of loyalty, strength, and dignity. Working with them taught me patience and respect, things I desperately needed to learn." The audience listened intently, some nodding in agreement while others scribbled notes in their notebooks. Teachers exchanged approving glances, clearly impressed by how far Alex had come. After the talk, Alex stayed behind to answer questions from curious students. One teenager raised her hand hesitantly and asked, "Do you ever feel like people will always judge you for what happened?" Alex paused before answering. "Of course," he said honestly. "There are days when I walk into a room and know people are thinking about that night. But I've realized something important. If I focus on doing good and being better, those judgments matter less. It's not about erasing the past. It's about building a future worth remembering." Over time, Alex became a sought-after advocate for responsible tourism. He traveled to schools, conferences, and community centers, sharing his story with anyone willing to listen. His message resonated deeply, especially among young adventurers eager to explore the world. Every culture has its own rules and traditions. He often reminded his audiences, respect them, even if you don't fully understand them. And always remember, your actions can leave lasting impressions, for better or worse. Back home, Alex's family beamed with pride whenever they saw him featured in interviews or speaking engagements. Friends who had once distanced themselves during the scandal reached out to reconnect, amazed by the person he had become. Even strangers approached him occasionally, thanking him for turning his mistake into a lesson for others. Though Alex would never forget the night he kicked a royal guard's horse, it no longer haunted him the way it once did. Instead, it served as a reminder of how far he had come, and how much he still wanted to give back. Standing outside Buckingham Palace one crisp autumn morning, he gazed at the guards mounted on their horses and felt a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the second chance he'd been given, for the lessons he'd learned, and for the opportunity to inspire others to tread carefully and respectfully in a world full of beauty and tradition. As he turned to leave, Alex smiled softly to himself. The road ahead was uncertain, as all roads tend to be, but one thing was clear: he was ready to face whatever came next, with humility, purpose, and an unshakable commitment to doing better.